Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's July 14th. I always like to throw in the date. And this is a really special, highly anticipated interview that I'm doing. And I think it's been about 6 or 7 months in the works. And I think just to make life easier, I'm going to read the title of this particular interview that makes it better. This is with Caryn Radick and Tara Kelley from Rutgers University Library. And this interview that I waited 6 or 7 months to do is called New Jersey Digital Newspaper Project, a collaboration of Rutgers University Libraries, New Jersey State Archives, and the New Jersey State Library. And we're with Caryn Radick on the bottom. Her name is up there. She's the principal investigator and project director, and Tara Kelley, the co-principal investigator, and in quotes, a whole new world of bringing the past to life, unquote. I got involved several years ago. I might as well say this up front. I got involved several years ago because of a dear friend, Grace Agnew, at Alexander Library, and one thing led to another, and I was introduced to the project they were doing, and then as a journalist, it filtered down that I was offered a place on the advisory board for the New Jersey Digital Newspaper Project, which I was so proud to accept, and it expanded my mind. And one of the questions that Caryn and Tara, why did I get involved in this? Which is, I'll make it part of my monologue. I got involved in this because I came up with this. I came up with this little phrase all by myself. If you don't capture the past, you'll never capture the future. And we'll go through this as we begin this. You'll all discover out there the relevance of what they're doing, and the timeliness and how what went on 100 years ago or whenever is so relevant and pertinent now. And it's such a thrill and joy to see newspaper headlines from years ago, and sometimes you have to look at it and you marvel at what you guys are doing, and you say to yourself, well, not that much has changed. And it's a great learning experience, and it's part of our history. So that's a little bit of an intro, and I think next I'll call on Caryn and Tara just to give a little bit of a brief bio of yourselves, and then we'll jump. So Caryn, take it away.
Sure. My name is Caryn Radick, and I am digital archivist at Special Collections and University Archives at Rutgers University Libraries. So I spend time working to put our collections online and information about our collections and special collections and university archives online. And since 2016, I've worked on this project to digitize New Jersey's historical newspapers, which is part of the National Digital Newspaper Program, which is funded by the National Endowment for Humanities. And ultimately, the papers appear on the Library of Congress's Chronicling America website. Grace Agnew, who you mentioned, was the co-principal investigator for the first parts of the grant, and then Tara Kelley came on board a few years later, and we've been doing this since 2016, and we're on our third round now, which should extend into 2022.
Tara.
So hi, I'm Tara Kelley. I'm audiovisual archivist at Rutgers University Library Special Collections and University Archives. I joined Rutgers in July of 2016. So yes, I'm a few years late to the party. But when Grace Agnew, who was the co-principal investigator, took a step back to deal with other duties at Rutgers Libraries, I jumped in because at that point we were starting to deal with film density and film equipment and measurements, and that's more my special area of operations. I've got a background in film preservation and film archiving, so this was a perfect entree into the newspaper project.
Wow. What I want to do real quick is kind of do a little visual aid for everybody to see. This is one of the many things that you sent me. It's the Newark Evening Star, and it's the ship sinking after ramming iceberg. It's the headline from the Titanic, as a matter of fact. I'm grasping, but it's from the Newark Evening Star, and I'm a Newark guy, and that's why I was particularly attracted. But that's what this is about. This is so actually. It's a great question. What is the New Jersey Digital Newspaper Project?
Sure. So as I was saying, the project digitizes historical newspapers, New Jersey's historical newspapers, and it's part of this larger project from the National Endowment for the Humanities, where different states have done the same thing. They've been digitizing newspapers, primarily from microfilm. I think in the 1990s, there was a project where different states went around and just looked at the newspaper resources in their states and microfilmed them, for preservation purposes. So this is a follow-up where instead of people having to come to the libraries and use those microfilm machines, which I think, as far as I know, no one seems to like using microfilm machines. It's something people will do if they absolutely need to, and I understand that because I've gotten that headache too. So instead, this digitizes them so that instead of having to come in, they're just accessible through the internet. And they're searchable, and you can see New Jersey's history. Primarily, the newspapers are from the late 19th, early 20th century, but there are some that are a little bit earlier and some that extend into the 20s. And they're just fantastic snapshots of what was happening in New Jersey at those times.
Why is this really important to do this?
Well, as archivists, I think that's just what we do, is we want to preserve the past so that it's accessible to the future. But in this case, rather than just preserving it and putting it away, maybe for somebody to come and find, this is really putting it out there so that it's easily found. You don't even have to necessarily be searching for one of these stories to find them. You can come across them via Google, for example. And I think there's just so much that's happened that, we don't know about or we've forgotten. And I know if you just start paging through these newspapers, sometimes it's just astonishing to see what was going on. The stories that captured people's imaginations and the weird products that were advertised. So it just really gives you an introduction into daily life or weekly life at different times.
Okay.
And Tara, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on what's cool about it.
I think also what's interesting is in the past, you used to have to go to either special collections on site or the state archive on site and look at microfilm. Right. Or if a digitized copy was available, it was sort of limited to being on site at a location. And this project, not just for New Jersey, but nationally, has really opened up America's newspapers to the nation. And I believe also internationally as well, so that, within copyright boundaries, you have the capacity to go and do research, throughout the United States and compare newspapers and news stories. So it's an incredible resource for researchers. And, it's been interesting for us as project partners with other communities to kind of compare notes, go to workshops, see what other states are doing with their treasures. I think it's really freeing to kind of be a researcher these days and have access to this material. And I think NEH and the Library of Congress has done a terrific service for everyone.
It really is. I want to do another visual aid. Well, I have my whole thing here is covered with visual aids, but this is from the Perth Amboy Evening News, which is one of the newspapers that you've and I didn't even know they had a newspaper. Of course, I learned that sitting in. But this is July 14th, 1916. It takes, I don't know if you can see it, take Matawan. It's about a shark
Yes,
and a boy.
yes.
Take Matawan boy's body from shark-infested creek.
Very famous incident in New Jersey history.
Really?
Yes. It's the Jaws story. It actually is the basis for the Peter Benchley writing Jaws.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yep.
There were multiple shark attacks in 1916, and the one that you just showed the headline for was probably the most shocking because the shark swam up a creek.
Wow. So this
And
this is a wow. This is a wow. And it's funny. I joke about this with my son, but when I saw the movie Jaws in the mid '70s, and I'm being brutally honest with you, that was the last time I went into the ocean. No, I'm serious.
I'm not laughing.
I
smooth
have not been in the ocean since I saw Jaws in 1975, 6. And my son is the same way. I passed that along to him. We just don't go in the ocean.
I think you're not the only one.
You're not. You're not. I mean, I think I remember that summer, and we were young, but I had friends who didn't understand the concept of ocean, and they were like, "I'm not going in my swimming pool." The idea of getting into the water, that was the end.
Yeah, and it's funny. Before we went on air, my wife yelled in from the kitchen. I mentioned this to you before we went on air. They in Cape May, they just saw a 1,400-pound shark that they had tagged swimming around. And then I looked at the Perth Amboy Evening News, and there ain't much of a difference. And that's the beauty of what you're doing. And by the way, this I'm going to be talking about this Peter Benchley thing. This is like, wow. So, how did special collections and university archives at Rutgers get involved in this?
Sure. Well, special collections was heavily involved in that predecessor project that I mentioned, where they were gathering newspapers, and they had partnered with, I think, the state archives and the state library. So when the NEH announced that there were these grants to kind of continue the work and digitize these newspapers, there were a lot of conversations between us at Special Collections and my predecessors there before my time, the New Jersey State Library and the New Jersey State Archives, where they talked about how we could be part of this. And I think initially just the timing wasn't right, so the conversation kept continuing. But around 2015, the question came up again of, can New Jersey actually participate in this grant? So several of us sat around a table and talked about how it would work, along with Grace Agnew. And we realized that if we pooled our resources, that we did have the capability to move this forward. And with special collections, our previous head, Ron Becker, just such an expert in New Jersey history and New Jersey newspapers, and so dedicated to this project that he was very willing to commit resources and his knowledge to writing up the grant application and talking about the history of newspapers in New Jersey and why digitizing them was important. And from there, we decided to work together to put together an application, and thankfully it was accepted.
Wow. Just a quick plug about special collections. I've had opportunities to do stories for NJ Discover on special collections, and it's one of the great, amazing resources here in New Jersey. I always try to, what you have is beyond, and some of the things I've seen beyond. I've always tried to kind of warm up to those involved one day to give me the keys to go exploring, but I'll leave it at that. But in the stories I've done for NJ Discovery, when I spent a whole day viewing, it's what's there is quite a resource.
Sure, there are unique resources pertaining to the history of New Jersey and other areas. That's the whole point of Special Collections and Archives, is there materials that can't be found in other libraries.
Who else is involved in this in New Jersey? Is there anybody else doing this in New Jersey?
So we're project partners with the New Jersey State Library and the New Jersey State Archives. When I talk about the microfilm, the holdings of that microfilm are actually from the New Jersey State Archives. So if we weren't working with them, we wouldn't have the microfilm to digitize. And our colleagues at the State Library have the knowledge about the history of the newspapers, and they do the research into the history of the newspapers, so that there are essays on the website about these papers. And Deborah Mercer at the State Library just does an incredible amount of outreach to the New Jersey communities about the newspapers.
What did you, for the initial grant, how did you prepare? I mean, that must be almost overwhelming to even think of that.
It is. Well, for me, I did not have that much experience trying to put together a grant application. Thankfully, Grace Agnew has a lot of great experience, and she was crucial in putting it together. So basically, the granting agency, the NEH, issues a call for applications, and they explain what they want. And it's a pretty detailed call, and you have to do what they're asking. They want a narrative explaining New Jersey newspapers and the histories, to know that you understand it. They want to know that you're technically capable of doing the project. They wanted to see a timeline of how the project would work. So it's looking at these different pieces and putting them all together in one package. And then there's a specific office at Rutgers that helps with grant submission. It's a really intense process. I think I was a bit shocked by it the first time, because there are just so many pieces, and you need to make sure that you get them all, because I think it's almost an automatic rejection if all the pieces aren't there. And then we filed it, I want to say, in January of that first year, and then you kind of forget about it. And we got word in August that we would be getting the grant, and I believe the grant started in September. So it was a very quick turnaround from you're accepted to let's get this going.
So I held up this Perth Amboy, and then I held up this Newark Evening Star, which I think became Newark Evening News. So what is the process of picking a newspaper?
It's a great question. We get asked that a lot. And so far, we have a certain criteria that we try to meet. We're still working from microfilm. So we want newspapers that are held on microfilm by the state archives. And when I say on microfilm, there are the copies that you would run through a machine, but what the state archives have are what are called master negatives. So they're sort of the first, struck from the plate, I guess I would say, first copy. And so they're in very good condition, but they're kept in a vault, and they don't come out for anything, and you don't put them on a microfilm machine. So it's one of these situations where you have to be very careful. And Tara is an expert in handling microfilm and film, and we had her give us a tutorial on here's how you touch it, here's how you don't touch it, here's the gloves that you should wear. So we needed them for that, and we needed to know that there was microfilm. Then we've generally been restricted by materials that are in public domain, because you would need to do research to determine whether or not a paper is in public domain. So usually right now the cutoff is 1925, 1926, but the project itself will take papers up to 1963. So we need that. So we look at what's available, what's on microfilm. We're trying to get some geographic balance. This is New Jersey. We are very passionate about where we are from in New Jersey, and we want to see ourselves represented. And so we knew we wanted some from North Jersey, some from Central Jersey, which is where I'm originally from. So I insist that yes, there is a Central Jersey.
Yes.
Some from South Jersey, some from the shore. So as this project has moved forward, we keep trying to balance that out. And just another issue that we have is that we also try to use papers that haven't already been digitized. So we get requests for newspapers that are held by companies or maybe the copy that's online isn't very good. But for now, we've been trying to use papers that don't appear some way online.
So I was privileged to observe a while back some of the process of digitalization over my head, and what I did take away is hugely painstakingly delicate. So can you just briefly talk about the process of digitalization?
Sure. I will just say for this particular project, we don't actually do the digitizing in-house. We have vendors that do it, but I could think, Tara can talk better about just the handling the microfilm, sort of the process that we do, and I can explain sort of the overview of the project.
Okay.
So I think we have project technicians, and really, we should say right out that we have 3 people. We currently have 2 people, but in total, we've had 3 people who've been project technicians who've worked on this project from the go. And they are really experts now, technical experts in this, and they're Giovanna Legato Pugliese,
Yes.
Christy Chanda, and Jacob Paul. And the 3 of them have become experts. And essentially, you're looking at the condition of the microfilm, and you're basically looking for, not just when I look at this, what is the start point, and does it have all of the pages, and are the pages in sequence, but also what is the condition of the film? Is it scratched up? Is it, how much wear and tear is this on this physical copy? Obviously we have master negatives, those don't get touched, but if we're looking at a reference copy, that actually has seen more use. So we do try to get some good condition reads. And again, we're looking for little things in the film that we can put in a spreadsheet, so that when the vendors come to look at this and they have to do the digital copies, we've already flagged things like, when these things were originally microfilmed, sometimes the person stepped away for a moment to have a break. And when they did that, they rephotographed a page. But we have to let the vendor know that, so that they don't suddenly go, "Ooh, you have a duplication here." We try to flag those things. Or somebody has their hand in the photograph when they were taking the picture. You kind of let people know these things. So I'd say our project technicians have become extremely adept at, quickly identifying condition and these sorts of problems. And sometimes also the condition of the paper by the time it got to the microfilm stage.
Right.
I mean, papers, obviously, whether they were made of rag or other content, they began to disintegrate depending on how they were kept or how they were stored. And so there were also those things where the person photographing had to maybe reconstruct out of pieces that picture. And so again, it's a situation where you want to let the vendor know that is coming up, so that when they go to duplicate it, they're aware and they can maybe make some adjustments.
Okay. So what the content that you produce, how does that, it gets used in research and classes and projects and internships occur, right?
Yes, well, a lot of it, of course, it's one of the things that maybe sort of the downsides of my job, as I put it, is that sometimes I never really know how people use the material I put out there, because the whole point is that they're able to find it without having to ask somebody, which is fantastic. But sometimes I think there are probably some really good stories about how these newspapers were used. But we do use them. We do a lot of outreach with the newspapers. I have taught a class at Rutgers for first-year students that looks at the newspapers from the newspaper project, looks at the history of New Jersey through the stories they tell, but it also focuses on the behind the scenes of the project, because I want the students to understand that these newspapers don't just appear online with no effort, that there's a lot of labor that goes into making them available, to making them accessible, to making them searchable. We also have an award for New Jersey History Day students where if they use the newspapers in their research, they might get a prize. So we try to encourage that. And I know this last semester, I had an intern from Rutgers Public History program who was working with me on the blog. There's a project blog, and we like to feature stories from the newspapers, and she was able to kind of dig into things that she was interested in, which I thought was fun because she's an anthropology major. Her name is Natalie Lau, and she's had some blog posts. So she found these articles that appealed to her as somebody who studies anthropology. And it was very interesting just seeing how she approached them.
Interesting. I'm going to do another side note. And you sent me this, and I just briefly want to make a comment. Snake oil, and I'm showing this to everybody. Snake oil, and I'm going to be posting this stuff for people to see when I promote. Miller's antiseptic oil, known as snake oil, has brought relief to thousands of sufferers. I don't have a date on this, but it's old. But and I mentioned this to you before we went on air, the relevance and the timeliness of this, because last night I watched, and I don't know why I did this, but I watched a 45-minute commercial for basically snake oil. No, I kid you not. It was about a book. I took notes. I have to find it, but it's not important. But the point being, it was an oil that is composed of actually cannabis and myrrh and 3 or 4 other oils, and they put this oil together, and now they say if you drink it or rub it on your knee, you're cured of all your arthritis. And I prepared this, last night for our talk, and I said to myself, are you kidding me? This is 100 years ago, and nothing has changed. So it's almost like a challenge to the audience out there is to go to the links that we're providing, go look and study and absorb, and then you'll do one of these eurekas. Ain't nothing has changed. It's 100 years later, and they're still doing the snake oil. Unbelievable.
Everything old is new again.
Yep. Just I was so and I thought it was rather fortuitous, and maybe even synchronistic or spiritual, that I found that last night, and I was hooked. I watched this thing for 45 minutes, and I have a pharmacy background from Rutgers, and I'm relatively intelligent, but I watched it right up into the end where they wanted you to spend $247 to buy the book of recipes to make your own oil. At which point I exited. But I knew I'd be seeing you guys, and with this, I was so bowled over that nothing has changed. The FDA and all these, nothing. And that's the most refreshing, amazing thing about what you're doing for people who take the time to look. Even if you're not using it for research, just for pure entertainment.
There are a lot of rabbit holes that you can fall down, and I know sometimes I'll search for one thing in the newspapers, and my eye will just be caught by an advertisement or a story, and I'll find that I need to follow that story through and find out what happened, or look for other advertisements, whatever it is that intrigues me. But that happens a lot, where I'll just jot something down, needing to come back to it, and then I try to figure out where did I jot that down, because I really want to see that thing again.
So I'll see if I can spit this out the right. So how many users and page views have you gotten? Is that relevant to ask?
It could be relevant. We don't track the statistics at Rutgers because these newspapers are on the Library of Congress website.
Okay.
We do get statistics from them, but they're yearly. Okay. So the last ones I have are a little bit behind, but obviously in early 2020, the last ones I have are from July 2019 to June 2020. There was quite a spike. Obviously, people were at home a lot more between January and June 2020. So I've got a list that says there were page views for New Jersey that were in the like 70,000 plus for the month of June 2020. So, and the numbers have been escalating. So I would guess probably around 100,000-ish a month.
That's fabulous. That really is.
It's exciting.
It is exciting. And I always like to throw something out and then kind of track, as I'll do with this in my own little microcosmic world, to see if we've done some resonance and lighting some fires, to quote Jim Morrison. Anyway, have there been any like particular challenges in working on this project?
COVID. Caryn, do you want to talk about restructuring our workflow to
Sure.
incorporate off-campus workflow?
Sure. Well, I think like a lot of us, we were used to going in to work in an office every day. And when COVID hit and we shut down, we suddenly found ourselves in a situation where the library we worked in was closed. We could not access it. And that meant that the microfilm and the equipment that we used for the microfilm was closed as well. And not only that, but our vendors, we're experiencing the same thing. So it was kind of strange because you might have the experience where, okay, there's a snowstorm or a hurricane and maybe, you're shut down, but you work with people who are open, but this is something where everybody shut down. So ultimately, what we did was we decided to have the project technicians who just work on this grant focus on outreach. We had our blog, but the blog we didn't have a lot of stories on it. So we really focused on how we could bump those up. There were also things that had been set into motion that we were able to kind of finish up, by which I mean, if a batch, we call 10,000 pages is called a batch, and this project is done in batches. So there were a couple of batches that were in the production process, and they were far enough along that after some time, we were able to say do quality review online and get some things finalized. But there was a stopping point with new newspapers where until we could get back into the office, which wasn't until August of 2020, we weren't able to move it forward. And then as far as other challenges go, the technicians have come to me with things like, we have pages that are half a page of fragments and then another half page of fragments, and we think they're the same page. So trying to figure out, is that worth putting online? And sometimes you look at something where there's only half a page and you say, well, there are articles on this half page. So even though the whole page isn't there, I think we should put it online because that one story might make a difference for someone. And then it's just working with technology. There are occasional issues that need to be troubleshooted. And they can come up very suddenly, and then it's kind of fun. It's like solving a puzzle or a mystery when you can fix them. But in those moments, there can be a bit of panic.
Another visual aid I wanted to throw up for a little bit. This is an ad. I don't have the date, but it's got to be awfully old because the phone number is 259. Go figure that out. This is from the Princess Shop.
All you need.
In Perth Amboy. And you know what? I'm not an expert on fashion and stuff, but it's not necessarily that far out. And why this particularly struck me, and we discussed this, what folks can do to encourage people to do their own. But early on in my sitting on the advisory board, I mentioned this before we went on air. You had shown me, you had shown the group, and we had seen an early ad, commercial ad. It was in the shape of a dollhouse, and in each room of the dollhouse that you could see in this newspaper ad was a different vendor advertising their product. So boom, 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 whatever they were selling. And my observation then, and this is why I love what you're doing, because it's so fascinating and it really challenges imagination. But I observed that, oh my gosh, this is Amazon, 100 years ago. Nothing's changed, the way they presented the products and stuff. This is, I think, part of the beauty of what you do for people to look at that, and it's like, oh wow, it isn't oh wow. Have you made any particular discoveries on your own? Has anything surprised you in what you've uncovered?
Well, I think what you were just saying, sometimes the relevance of something that you see where you think this could have been something I'd come across yesterday. I did an exercise with my class where I didn't necessarily expect to find them, but I looked at topics like elections and voting rights and even the pandemic, because our newspapers had the 1918 pandemic. And it was amazing to see, here's a story about the fact that the saloons are open and that might be causing the spread of disease. Here's a story about these newfangled voting machines and not really being sure if they're going to count the ballots and the votes accurately. Here's somebody saying that, the sheriff and some deputies were kind of glaring at people on their way to vote. So there's voter interference.
Wow, and this is back then.
Yeah, back then. But you feel like, gee, this sounds very familiar. In fact, I called the exercise "Sound Familiar." Wow. Because these are things that you would have thought were very particular to 2020. And there's even a reference in the 1918, one of the articles, to the nurses wearing masks during the pandemic.
Wow. By the way, so fascinating, because nothing really you can pull from this, and that's been a theme of my chat with you guys, and you go back and you look and you say, Eureka, nothing much has changed. We had Richard Branson going to outer space, and a bunch of people are weightless. I'm going to enter that his contest. I mean, that's changed, but basically our life hasn't changed. It's really interesting. What in your opinion might intrigue people to I've touched on it in my own way, but what would intrigue people about this newspaper project? Disasters, bizarre things, the commercialization, things that you've discovered.
I'm always particularly drawn to the scandals, especially something like the Newark Evening News. That paper is very sensationalistic in some ways, and the Perth Amboy Evening News, often there are a lot of headlines, and one of the things that's always kind of intrigued me and shocked me a little bit is how it's very hard to find a newspaper front page from some of those papers that has good news stories on it. There's a lot of terrible things happened, but the thing that always kind of draws me in are these scandals. There's often these divorces. There was a story of an elopement that kind of went on in the Perth Amboy Evening News that really made the front page every day. And I think what really intrigues me about them is to realize that these were the scandals and sensations of the day. If you'd been walking around these towns, everybody would have been talking about these. And yet often these are pretty much lost in time. If you go to Google them, they're not known. So it's just sort of this uncovering of these stories that obviously absorb people. They sold headlines, and yet nobody necessarily knows about them anymore. And to realize exactly how I guess ephemeral news can be, something that you think is a really huge story, it might be the kind of thing that 3 years from now you're kind of wondering what that was.
It's funny. I grew up in Newark, and we had the Newark Evening News, which you mentioned, and we had the Star Ledger. Those were our two newspapers. Newark's a pretty big city, biggest city in the state. and I was always partial to the Newark Evening News, editorially and sports wise, and of course the Ledger is what has emerged. And I'm a huge fan of newspapers that I can touch and feel and cut out things to read further.
I'm just realizing I should explain I'm saying Newark Evening News, and really there's all these variations on titles about the Newark Evening Star,
Yes.
Evening Star, and Advertiser.
Yes.
So I'm using a title that's not actually correct for the newspaper.
But it
but
was
just
the precursor, I guess. It was the precursor. I think eventually when that went out, the Newark Evening News, I think if I remember correctly, which I'm dating myself, which I hate to do. So be it. Oh, and I wanted to show another. I like to do these show and tell stuff. We discussed this too. This is Castle's Ice Cream. It has a big contest, and with all their flavors, and once again, and I think this was in Perth Amboy. I'm not sure.
It was Perth Amboy Evening News, and it was actually a January newspaper. I would have assumed it was a summer newspaper, but it's from the winter.
Wow.
I think in 1924. And what I love about that is that list of flavors. They advertise this ice cream as being, it's not pasteurized, it's heathized. And I don't know if heathing or heathization still exists today, but it was sort of this new technique they had that sounds like it was like pasteurization. But they held this contest where they apparently had these ice cream flavors and they wanted people to pick 3 flavors, and they said, we've got a list of 3 flavors, and we've taken this list of 3 flavors and it's in a bank vault, and everybody will send in their choices of 3 flavors because we have a mystery brick of 3 flavors of ice cream. So pick the 3 flavors, and there's a list of flavors, and some of them are, I don't know what this is. What is White House ice cream? You know, what is, I think Nestle Road pudding, thanks to Tara, we realized was probably chestnut. So there are just these flavors on the list that I'm very intrigued by. I don't know what they are.
You know, I think I have. I think I have I have a bunch of things here. I thought I had. I think I do. I guess I don't. I thought I had somewhere. Maybe I didn't print it up. But you're right. I did look at that list of flavors, and once again, my takeaway, it could be today, and it is, to me, it is just the greatest joy to go back and to have this resource to go back and look and think, and it's such a great, sociologically, you think we were with Richard Branson going out of space, you think we were so advanced, but in so many ways we're not. And and that's what part of your project shows us, that we're people.
We're people, and we're maybe a lot closer to people from 100 years ago in ways that we don't realize.
Yeah, it's just we want to think it's a whole dramatically new world, but it ain't. And that's the beauty of exploring this and seeing this. Social media has helped you with this project, getting it out there, etc.
Absolutely. We have a project blog, and Special Collections University Archives has a really fantastic social media presence between Facebook, Twitter, and especially our Instagram account. So every month there's the states that participate in this newspaper project do what's called a Crawman Party, for Chronicling America Party.
That's very cool. That was my last question to ask you. What is that?
So it's a hashtag that we use every month, and we're invited to contribute content from our newspapers on Twitter using that hashtag Crawman Party. So I think the July one is going to be
Ice cream.
National Ice Cream Month, right?
Yep.
Ice cream.
Yep.
And we've done them in the past. I think there was one that was, one of my favorites was Mustache March, where it was images of mustaches in the newspapers, or we might have done that one on our own just because they were fun. And they'll ask around among the state projects, what do you want to feature this month? I think there was one about space, space and the planets. And that was a lot of fun as well. So we try to participate in them every month. We may have missed a few, but it's also a lot of fun to see what the other states do. And sometimes you realize that the content in the papers is the same. You have the same story because it appears in other places, and everybody has their own twists on them.
So I'm alerting everybody that it'll every couple of minutes we'll embed all the links that are relevant and pertinent for people to do their own exploring and sharing and learning and growing. And if there's any other comments, we're going to kind of wind down this. The anticipation of doing this with you guys has been going on for a long time, and I'm so thrilled that I've done this well, because I genuinely believe in what you're doing, and that, I guess, as a journalist, has got to be part of the reason why I pursue and what fascinates me and why I got involved, because I really believe in this. Drifting back. I have to take a picture. I have to find it, but it was bequeathed to me the full newspaper, the whole newspaper of the D-Day, which is kind of cool. I mean, it's the whole newspaper. It's all intact, and it's in plastic, so it hasn't really deteriorated. But every time I look at it, I have to find it's in the basement. I think of the digital newspaper project. But anyway, I got to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Tara,
Thank you, and thank you for being on the advisory board. And it's wonderful to hear that as a journalist. You enjoy this project.
It is a big thrill for me. I love what you're doing. I hope we can light some fires out there with this. And again, I know you've got all kinds of stuff on your plate, but I thank you for your time and helping me put this together and to share this, hey, I'm here 7 days a week, 18 hours a day. You can always come back. No, I said this, we've done stuff with Sonia, when she was having the art way back. This was way back early on, and then I got a hold of the virtual people because they were doing such amazing things, and we did a thing with those imaginative virtual people. One of them was Anderson. I forgot his first name, but anyway. I love Alexandra Library. I love that. I've spent enough time there, and again, I love what you're doing. So again, thank you so much, and come back.